In this video, I want to give you an overview of this power supply, which is right now my favorite residential-friendly mining power supply, the EVGA SuperNOVA 1300W 80 plus gold rated mining power supply. First thing I want to mention is that this power supply is not officially available in every single region or country, including my country. And it seems like this power supply is only available in China, as I can only find the information about this power supply from the official EVGA's website of China. So the units that I have are import units that cost me about $240 per unit, and they are imported in from China by some local sellers. So do not expect the 10-year warranty that people often get with official EVGAs. Now, I found an article from Tom's Hardware, and it seems like in the past, this power supply was available in Newegg. Of course, I'm not from the US, and I'm not sure about the warranty and things of this nature, so couldn't comment about it. Nonetheless, this power supply has been my absolute favorite and go-to power supply if I were to build a residential-friendly GPU mining rig. And I even made a tutorial and guide on how to build a GPU mining rig. I'll put a link in the top right corner. And the power supply used is actually this exact unit, okay? Not the same unit because that is already on the rig, but it is this model. This video is not going to be a thorough technical review or test about this power supply, but rather my personal thoughts and experience using it to build GPU mining rigs. Now, this power supply has been my absolute favorite power supply for building GPU mining rigs. It is not as cost-effective as other mining power supplies like those China or Alibaba mining power supplies or server power supplies, but it is very residential friendly. Now, when I say residential friendly, I'm primarily referring to two things. First, it supports 100 volts to 240 volts. Now, in my country, 240 volts is the standard, and I understand that not all countries are like this. So to those who are mining at home and you only have 120 volt circuits, this power supply is supported, unlike some China mining power supplies that I know cannot be run at 120 volt circuits. Now, secondly, this power supply is quiet compared to those China or Alibaba mining power supplies or even server power supplies when they are being loaded. It runs really quiet, just like what you would expect from a normal ATX power supply with a fan on, maybe just a tad louder, as this is still, after all, a 1300 watts power supply. Longevity-wise, I couldn't speak for it as I haven't used this specific model of power supply long enough to really comment on it. But in general, you get the build quality of EVGA for both the power supply itself, which is the build quality of this is really, really great. And also, the cables are also very great. And let me just open up this box and let you see what's inside the box. So I've already taken out the power supply, and basically, as a modular power supply, you get a bunch of cables. And these cables, the quality are really not too bad. And it is a normal ATX power supply, so you get the motherboard 24 pins and CPU strand as well, and SE power cord. And you can see that this is a plug for China. I will need to swap it out to the local plug later on. As for the cables, they might not feel as high quality as other EVGA power supplies like what you get from the EVGA SuperNOVA G+ and P+ series, at least from how they look and feel when you are touching it. But the build quality is way better than many other ATX power supplies cables out there in the market. Now, personally, I have never had any issues with EVGA power supplies. Now, despite this is, seems like it's a China product after all, even you look at the box. But honestly speaking, nowadays, what are the things that are not made in China? Your splitters, your PCIe risers, and all those things, they're actually made from China. And also like server cases and even some mining motherboards are made of China. And looking at these cables, if I were to compare to other EVGA's products, power supplies to be specific, It might feel a little bit like the quality is a little bit one notch lower, but overall, the cables are still looking really great. All right, now let me share with you a little bit more about this power supply. Now, apart from being residential friendly, here are two more reasons that I love about this power supply. Now, the first reason is not limited to this specific power supply, but rather the EVGA's power supplies in general, specifically the modular ones. On typical modular power supplies from most of the brands out there, on the power supply itself, you will find a lot of 8-pin ports on it, and usually it is labeled CPU or PCIe. Now, some manufacturer might say VGA instead of PCIe. On the most power supplies out there, these 8-pin connectors or ports are shared amongst the CPU strands and PCIe strands. If a power supply has 5 of those connectors on the power supply, which is very normal for 850 watts to 1000 watt modular power supplies out there, you're going to get 2 CPU strands and 3 PCIe strands. This is because ATX power supplies like these are designed for normal PC, of course, and the high-end motherboards that have beefy features might require 2 4+4 pin CPU connectors to power the board. So you get 2 CPU strands, and the rest you get PCIe strands. So a lot of times, even if you have the power capacity to support more GPUs or higher wattage in general, you are limited by the number of PCIe strands you have because each strand is limited to a certain amount of wattage. Now, you can definitely purchase another PCIe strand, as you will most probably be using only one CPU strand, but that would be additional cost and you have to deal with aftermarket cables whereby the quality can be a big question mark. On EVGA's modular power supplies, you will see dedicated CPU ports, and at the same time, you may or may not get 1 or 2 more PCIe or VGA connectors on the power supply. Now, even if you are just getting the 750 watts power supply from EVGA, GA, G+, and P2 series, I think, not the GT series unfortunately, you are already getting 4 PCIe or VGA ports or connectors and 2 dedicated CPU ports on the power supplies itself. And of course, in this case, you will get 2 CPU strands and 4 PCIe strands. Right off the bat, you have enough strands for you to work with. On the 1000 watt and 1300 watt power supplies by EVGA, you get 6 PCIe ports and strands, so you can power an entire 6 GPUs in a rig, granted you do not exceed the 80% of the power capacity. For GPUs like the GTX 1660 Supers and TIs, which have a TDP of around 125 watts and consume not more than 100 watts while mining Ethereum with proper undervolting, you have more than enough capacity and strands to power 6 of those in a single rig without any problems. Of course, you will need splitters in that case. You hardly do this. You can hardly do this on a typical 1000 watt power supplies, which only give you 3 PCIe strands. You have to split them like mad in order to power 6 GPUs and their risers, and it is dangerous to do so as well. Now let's talk about this specific power supply, which is the 1300 watt mining power supply by EVGA. On the ports side, you get only 1 CPU port on the power supply, which is fine because we only need 1 anyway. We are not going to do any crazy overclocking, and you get 6 VGA ports just like other 1300 watt power supply of EVGA. Now, if we do the math, 1300 watts times 80% rule, it is safe to use 1040 watts from the power supply safely. Now, assuming your system, meaning that your motherboard and every other things is consuming 50 watts, you have another 990 watts for your GPUs. As we have 6 ports and also 6 strands, definitely we have enough strands, just that the rest are in the box. So we can power 1 GPU per strand for 6 GPUs that consume up to 165 watts each. And 165 watts for a single PCIe strand is definitely not going to be an issue, even if we were to use a splitter. If you were to ask me, the maximum that I'm comfortable to power would be 6 units of RTX 3060 Ti's or RTX 3070's maximum, alright? As each of those will consume upward around 120 watts to 130 watts while mining Ethereum, and also around 150 watts to 160 watts mining with other core intensive algorithms. Now, of course, this is much depends on your overclock and undervolt settings, and the caveat is you know what you are doing and your overclock and undervolt settings do not reset. Now, this is usually not an issue if you are using any Linux operating system like the HiveOS, but for Windows, I wouldn't suggest that. It is notorious for crashing issues. The RTX 3060 Ti's and RTX 3070 are two mainstream GPUs that, for mining nowadays, okay, due to their superb efficiencies in multiple algorithms. So I would say this power supply is going to be a very great choice. It's going to be very great if you are working mainly with those rigs that are primarily runs on these two types of GPUs. And with proper undervolting, each of them will consume around like 120 watts mining Ethereum, depending on your settings as well, and sometimes more, sometimes less, and that puts the power consumption of the entire rig to about 720 watts to not more than 800 watts with the system. So this consumption level is about 55% to 60% of the power capacity of this power supply. And just so you know that gold rated power supply is the most efficient, okay, it is most efficient when it is being loaded at around 50%. So I would say, okay, this is really a sweet spot for a lot of things. Apart from getting sufficient PCIe or VGA strands and ports for the build, another reason why I like this specific power supply is the PCIe strand itself. So let me just open this first. Now, before purchasing this power supply, I was not expecting anything about it because I do not really see any discussion about it in the internet. Now, the PCIe strands supplied by this EVGA mining power supply is a daisy chain, which, which has two 6+2 pins connectors on it, plus a little strand at the end which has a 6-pin connector. Now, for GPU mining, it is very normal for us to use 8-pin to dual 6+2 pin, okay, splitter like this, whereby one end will be going into the GPU and another end we will detach this 2-pin, and the 6-pin will be used to power the risers. Now, with this special, PCIe or VGA strand, you may or may not need a splitter anymore. Now, this is not a perfect thing, and I think this is something that is a little unfortunate. Now, the last strand that carries the 6-pin, which is this one, is a little bit too short for some. If your riser only has a 6-pin connector at the front, which is where you plug in a USB, I don't really think that you can reach the 6-pin comfortably. So in this case, this kind of feature is like a waste. But if your riser has a 6-pin connector at the side, then you could power both your GPU and the risers without utilizing any splitters, which is great because original cables like these are always preferred and you would have less point of failure, I would say, in this case. Another thing that I would like to mention is that based on my experience, the length of this PCIe strand can be a little issue for some. Now, I understand that the length is always an issue for some people because the length is like kind of standard. Now, to give you a context, my mining rig frame is about 500mm long and the height is like considered low as well, okay, compared to a lot of the mining rig frame out there like the Veda frame. Now, the power supply is fitted at one side of the frame. Now, for the cable to reach the other end, okay, the other end of the the GPU, there might be a little bit compromised. You wouldn't be able to do like any cable management later because the strand barely reach the GPU on the other end. Now, and of course, depending on the size of your GPU and where the 8 pins of the GPUs are located at, it might be easier or tougher for you to reach the last 1 or 2 GPUs without any kind of extension cables or PCIe splitters. Now, PCIe splitters naturally also work as an extension for our PCIe strand. So while we are using PCIe splitters in the past, we never feel that the cables, is not long enough in that, if that makes sense to you. But nonetheless, this kind of design can reduce the usage of splitters to a certain extent, and I'm really liking it. So this entire rig is running with the EVGA 1300W mining power supply. And I just want to show you the PCIe strand that we are using, the original PCIe strand. So this one strand coming in from the power supply. As you can see, there are two 6+2 pin, and this GPU only requires one single 8 pin, so another one is not being utilized. And the last strand is going into the riser. You can probably tell that, okay, this cable is, decent length, but if your riser does not have a 6 pin at the side and is in front next to the USB port, you probably will run into issues whereby the last strand couldn't reach the front 6 pin on the riser. So another thing is that the power supply is on this side, and on the last GPU, you can see that the length is not enough, and there's no room for me to do like extra cable management. So I have to just make sure it is not touching any fans, and that's it. And the cable management is a little bit a mess, but it works, and I really like it. So there you have it. These are why this power supply is my favorite. The EVGA 1300W 80+ gold rated mining power supply. It is residential friendly. It works on 120 volts and 240 volt circuits. It is quiet, it is modular, great build quality, and it comes with sufficient strands and ports for a 1300W power supply compared to the other offerings out there. Now, the very practical use cases of this power supply is what I love it as well, and the daisy chain PCIe strand, which comes with an extra 6 pin at the end. These are the great things. Again, I understand that this power supply is not widely available, but if you happen to be able to grab one of these, okay, I hope this video at least gives you some ideas on what you can expect from this specific power supply. Now, with that being said, that's all for this video. If you like this video, you know what to do, okay? Don't forget, okay? Hit the thumb up, subscribe for more crypto mining related content, and also personal finance and investment content, things along those lines. Turn on the notification bell, and I will see you when I see you. Peace out.